Hey, good morning from Hong Kong. And it's great to be here. I'm missing Napa a lot. I haven't seen my house since, well, it's about 15 months now, which is in St. Helena. But, I'm feeling good to be here today and with Premier Napa Valley and, of course, the Napa Valley Vintners. And thanks again for asking me to do this panel on this amazing 2018 vintage. And just before I introduce my panel members, and of course, I have an awesome crowd of the best wine merchants in town, guys. Thanks for being here. And I just want to say that, I've tasted about and rated about 700 2018 reds and whites from Napa Valley. And I'm thoroughly impressed. I just love the vintage. And I love the harmony and balance in the wines. The wines have that incredible drinkability that really sends me back to the days when my dear father used to serve me at a young age wines from the 50s, 60s, and 70s from Napa Valley, but also great Bordeaux, classic wines with incredible balance and intensity, but also structure to age. And I really believe that 18 signifies something special for Napa Valley, a new benchmark, a new reference point. And I'm excited to talk to these fantastic winemakers who, by the way, I've already spoken to them in the last 2 months about their wines over Zoom, and it's been great. And I thought, let's get them all together and let's just have a jam session about this incredible vintage. So let me introduce the panel, if they can all come on now. I have Kristy Melton from Freemark Abbey, and she's going to have her 2018 Chardonnay today. Kristy, hi. Oh, you got it in your glass. Awesome. Then Dan Petrosky from Larkmead, a neighbor of mine and a good buddy who I like to drink wine with. And so he's going to be having his Dr. Olmo Larkmead 2018. Who's next? Okay. And now there's Jay from Seoul, Korea with Dana Estates, a wine I rated 100 points. And great to have Jay, my wife's from Seoul also. So it's cool to have him here. Then we have Helen Keplinger from Kerr Cellars, who made a fantastic wine with their Cab 2008 Wapo Vineyard. I actually love the name, so I got to go to Wapo next time I'm in Napa. She also, by the way, makes some Grace, which is also offered in the auction this year. And I love Grace wines from a long way back. Then we have Ashley Hepworth from Joseph Phelps, who's going to be serving Oh, Insignia, of course, sorry, Insignia, which I think may be one of her best Insignias ever. It's a fantastic wine. And then Rebecca Weinberg at Quintessa. I call her Miss Biodynamic, which is awesome. She's dynamic as well. But they're doing amazing things with vineyards, and their wines show it. They have incredible energy, and we'll have the Quintessa 2018. So yeah, let's start the whole conversation. I'd like to first have everyone talk about their idea about 2018. I can go through quickly what made it special in terms of the growing season. It was a pretty mild winter, and there was plenty of rain. Not as much as say in 17 or the year before, but there was enough. And then the spring was mild as well. But then there was actually the flowering was late, so it sort of set up the thing for a later harvest. And then the significant thing was going through the summer, there was very mild weather for Napa Valley. As we know, Napa's very hot in the summer and goes above 100, and we often get what we call heat spikes, very hot moments. But I actually had some statistics, and it's very interesting that the weather never got above 100 in July, August, and September. That's really significant. In fact, the highest recorded temperature for the growing season was 97. And so that was mild by Napa Valley standards. And it really set up a slow ripening process with nice tannin development and not too much sugar. And then basically producers, winemakers could harvest just about any time they wanted to. And I know that some of you, particularly Helen, said that could even be slightly stressful because you really want to get it right. You know, there was not a lot of pressure, whether it was heat spikes or, well, we don't have a lot of disease in Napa like other parts of the world, but it was really this just cool, beautiful harvest. And there was a little bit of rain in October, but it only was for a day. And I like to say that probably just like lightly clean the grapes of any dust. I mean, it was even a good thing. And there you have it. Everyone harvest amazing grapes. And then it was up to them to keep that incredible quality in the grape through their winemaking and get it into the bottle. And what I've tasted so far is fantastic. And I just love, like I said, the harmony and balance and the drinkability and the finesse and the tannins and the complexity. I know that actually Jay was saying to me, oh, this is a James Suckling vintage, he said to me. And you know what? You're dead right. I love the wines. So I'm there. 40 years of doing this. It's clearly a fantastic year for Napa Valley. So why don't I ask Kristy to say a few words about the vintage and what she thinks about it, and maybe even focusing, since she has the only white wine, also mentioning whites, because sometimes we overlook Napa Valley for whites, but I think there's a distinct style, particularly for Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay, and there's some fantastic whites being made. So Kristy, how about a few words for us?
Absolutely, James. Thank you so much. I love the 2018 vintage, just like you do. It's bright, it's refreshing, it's got complexity. And I want to say, for as much as all of us Cabernet winemakers on the panel talk about hang time for Cabernet, hang time is also super important for Chardonnay. It's not just about sugar and just acidity. Hang time in Chardonnay creates those textural layers of complexity that we're looking for. In a cooler fall, like you were pointing out, never over 100, we get that great nighttime coolness that preserves all that natural acidity in the wine, and we absolutely love that. But we get all of those layers, all of that beautiful from the long, cooler growing season that we've had lately. I can't help but call it cool, even though we don't think about it, because 2020, this year's already, it was 104 on Monday here. It's summer's getting warmer and sooner. And so we really love that 18 vintage consistency. It makes me love winemaking so much from those years, where every single time we walk the vineyard, everything is doing exactly what it should, exactly the way we hope for it. And we can plan our picks a week out almost sometimes, because everything is so consistent, and we love being able to pick exactly when we want, get it into the winery at the right time, and ferment it. They all fermented beautifully too, which is not always something we get in a vintage. And color came out, tannins came out, but in our whites, they maintained all of that beautiful complexity with that longer hang time that builds textures. So couldn't be happier about this wine. Thank you for including a white in the panel. We don't always see those, and we really appreciate it.
No, well, we'll come back to you when we taste the wine. So, Helen, how about a few words for you? What were some of the, how do you like the vintage, and what sticks in your mind about you as a winemaker, what it was like making wine that year?
So yeah, just as Kristy mentioned, and you said as well, and I think everybody can tell just from drinking the wines, they're so beautifully balanced, and we saw that balance in the vineyard early on. So the canopies came out, and there was just the right amount of canopy for beautiful dappled light, and the bloom and set happened, and it was plentiful clusters, but it was perfectly balanced with the canopies. And so in the vineyards, we didn't have to do a lot of work in terms of leaf or lateral removal for dappled light or crop adjustment. Everything was really just very nicely balanced. It did require some fine tuning, of course, and then going into all of those little windows of bloom and set and veraison were, they weren't big, but the weather was so consistent that there wasn't a lot of variability within blocks, within plants, as sometimes you get. So it was such a no-brainer, such a fun, easy vintage. And as I was talking to James earlier, sometimes during harvest, there's a heat event or a rain event, and you always go out and you look at the block and you look at the vines and you try to assess whether those vines, is the fruit ready? Is it not ready? What do the vines look like? What do the next few days hold in terms of weather? And really just try to understand, what your decision is in terms of picking or waiting and how long. And we didn't have any of that. And so instead it was just tasting and thinking, is this at the perfect ripeness where I'd like to pick, or would I like to wait? And if I wait, am I going to lose anything? Because obviously wines that are, so well balanced, if you can nail the freshness of the wine and it has natural lift, then, it's just really can make such a dynamic and perfect wine. So it was a really fun vintage. And then in fermentations, as Kristy also mentioned, they were really pretty easy. And I do a lot of native fermentations, which were very easy in 2018. And the extraction was also fairly slow. So you could really think about, from morning to evening in tasting, how much more would I like to get out of this? Do I want to back off? You could really just take, I think that's the beauty of it. During harvest, there's so many decisions that have to be made so quickly. And this was a vintage where you really had time to think, and you could think about your pick decisions and your fermentation management and when to press. And there wasn't anything pressing or rushing. It was just whatever you wanted to do. It was carte blanche.
That's awesome. Well, it shows. The wine has really, really nice balance. So let's hear from Dan. Dan, anything at Larkmead or also at your own place that strikes you about 18? I know you love the vintage.
Yeah, no, I think we all do, and it's going to come pretty evident as we taste through the wines tonight. But I have a great friend, and in my tasting group always says define your terms, and we talk about the warmth of a vintage or heat spike. So I just want to give you our definition of Napa Valley vintages. When we talk about a hot vintage, we're talking about vintages that are exceed 100 degrees. We have heat spikes that exceed 100 degrees. We talk about a warm vintage, we're talking about 95 degrees. We're talking about a cool vintage, we're talking about 90 degrees. So we're still, in a global perspective, at 90 degrees, we're still a very warm wine growing region. But at the same time, it's really wonderful to see a 90-degree vintage in Napa Valley. We saw that in 18, we saw that in 16, we saw that in 13, we saw that in 10, we saw that in 6. And the big thing is, like you said, James, earlier, there weren't really any heat spikes to worry about. It was really the September weather that was so perfect for maturation, and it allowed for that hang time. And as you get far up in Napa Valley, as you get, where Rebecca is, north of her, where Ashley is, where Kristy is, Helen with Grace, and then up towards Calistoga and Larkmead, and even Jay down in kind of South St. Helena Donna. That's the warmest parts of the Napa Valley. So the vintage was just amazing to have a cool streak through September to allow us to kind of harvest and make wines that had, continued freshness. There was nothing to kind of draw out any of the natural acidity or natural kind of red fruit flavors. And I feel really fortunate at Larkmead, in a very kind of stressful, gravelly soiled site, where at 22, 23 bricks, I lose all my pyrazines, and I can actually make beautifully delicious, kind of Napa Valley Cabernet at low potential alcohol, which makes the wines naturally fresher to drink and a little bit more balanced on the tannin profile, because a little less extraction. So yeah, I'm pretty pumped. I wish I was drinking Quintessa and Kerr and Insignia and a little bit of Chardonnay tonight, but and Donna State. But I'll have to stick with some Larkmead. But thank you for hosting, James.
Okay, buddy. So let's go on to Ashley. Ashley, I really thought your 18 Insignia was fantastic, and it was almost weightless. Sometimes it's really bold and rich. This had a weightless, incredible balance and purity to it. How did you do that? Tell me about 18.
I mean, I feel like it definitely wasn't me, it was the vintage, but thank you. I feel like the vintage was, it was cool, as everyone's mentioned. You guys have all said really great things about 18, but I feel like it was warm or just warm enough to get us through frost season, to get us through bloom, to get us through veraison. So it was like, we didn't have those Pirazini characteristics that we normally do in a cooler vintage, like 11 or like 9, but we had this sort of consistent coolness and just warm at just the right times. And it kind of led us through this super long, dry harvest, which was great, allowing us to definitely have hang time to allow for that phenological and or more just taste, actually, to get that taste ripeness that we all really go by. And we really created, I mean, all of us, I think, some really beautiful wines. I feel like the wines have a little bit more finesse. They're definitely supple. They're definitely going to be wines that age really well. But I was really happy with the vintage. We had a plentiful vintage. I think most people did in 2018 as well. But like Helen said, it was sort of an easy vintage. And I think we all really welcomed that after 2017. And I think the vintage is showing beautifully now. I think it's going to be a wines, especially Cabernet, even perhaps the Freemark Abbey Chardonnay, wines that age well because they just don't have super high bricks. So I think they're just beautifully, like ripened beautifully without highs and lows.
Fantastic. And let's get a comment from Rebecca. I mean, this 18 was definitely a biodynamic year. There wasn't any disease pressure, and your ecosystem must have been just singing in Rutherford. Tell me about it.
Yeah, it was. I mean, everyone's talking about this year, and I think Dan really hit it on the head where when we talk about a cooler year in Napa, we still have some warmth. But what was so special about 18 and what we all felt through the growing season was the harmony of the year, was the fact that the vines we had ample water, we had ample growth, we had good canopies, we had a good crop level, not too much, but not too little. Everything was just in balance and in harmony. And then it was so incredible to see that harmony follow us through to harvest, through the harvest decisions and into the winery. And it was a year where I think it really, for us at Quintessa, it really took us up a notch in our understanding of the vineyard and how our farming practices can steward these vines, because it was a year where you could see the effects of what you did without a heat wave coming in and sort of blurring this all together. And, you know, I think that not only because of the way the wines taste in 2018, but because of what we all learned from 2018, it really does herald a new era for Napa Valley, I hope. Not to put pressure on it, but.
Okay, let me get back to that, because that's actually a really good point about what you learned. But let me ask Jay to say a few words at Dana, how it felt in 18, making this, well, a number of fantastic wines, but particularly the incredible Lotus, which just blew me away.
Yeah, I think, thanks for the opportunity. And I just tried to represent more about the wine drinkers' perspective. There are so many great winemakers today, and I'm the only one represent more towards the wine drinkers. So I learned how to drink wine with the Bordeaux wines in the beginning. So I think that making wine from Napa is always struggling to work with over-ripening issue, and Bordeaux is under-ripening issue every year. So in terms of that point, I think 18 was one of the best vintage ever. I've been making wine since 2005. Of course, all the other panels here has been making wine in Napa a lot longer than I do. But 18 was almost worry-free vintage, because other than January and February, we had a very dry early winter after 3 years of a sort of drought. And then after that, we have a really good rain. And then ever since, I cannot think of a better vintage as a wine, the grape growers and winemakers in Napa. And I think the most important part is we have to do both. Compared to 40 years ago, all you have to do is ageable wine, undrinkable for 40 years, and then amazing wine after 40 years. But nowadays, all the winemakers in Napa has to make both drinkable, unreleased, and also ageable wine for consumers.
right.
And I think the 18 is one of the best, perfect ideal vintage for both purpose.
Hey, Jay, that's awesome what you said. And I totally agree with you because I'm not getting any younger. And I definitely want you guys to make wines that drink really well when they're young and they can age. So right on. And the wines really have that quality, but that's happening all over the world now. At least at jamessuckling.com, we're very, very, drinkability is an important attribute to wines that we highly score, and also ageability, which can come hand in hand. Sometimes we forget that some of the great back vintages of Bordeaux, 82, 59, those were all wines that drank incredibly well when they were young. I was there for 82. I wasn't there for 59. I'm not that old. But in fact, that's the word that I heard from people that I respected that were older than me. Yeah. So I want to get back to Rebecca. Like, that was really cool what you said about learning from 18, what you learned as a winemaker, not so much about scientifically what you learned about a cooler season and how the vines interact with the climate, but more so you as a winemaker. And did this give you a new understanding of the possibilities of winemaking? It's sort of a rhetorical question, but that you didn't have to necessarily make super big and concentrated wines. Tell me about it.
Yeah, I think that 2018 allowed us to see, what some of us have always been wanting, right? Is that we want to make wines that have depth of character, freshness, and a certain elegance and liveliness to them. And because of the heat that we have in Napa, I think that can sometimes be a challenge for us, where you can get these kind of unbalanced ripening curves, or you can be dealing with a lot more tannin or a lot more extraction than you intended. And 18 allowed us, as Helen said, to kind of make that exact picking decision, which you're right, can be a little stressful when you're like, well, the whole world is open to me. What do I do? But also to see how the vines react, how the wines reacted in terms of their extraction, in terms of their maintaining this incredible brightness and acidity from 2018. And you can see that you can have wines that have relatively, for our region, lower alcohol, lower bricks, that are still drinkable young.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And maybe Kristy, can you comment as well, since you represent one of the old standards of not you personally, the winery, the old standards of wineries in Napa Valley. Like, do you feel that way, even though you have these certain traditions that you have to abide by, or how do you feel about that? Absolutely. About what you learned?
Yeah, to your point, I'm not that old. I wasn't there 135 years ago, although some nights without sleep makes me feel like I am. Now, there is very much this quintessential property about Freemark Abbey that resonates with me. We do make wines that are drinkable now. That's been the evolution that we've seen through the past 50 years of its recent history. But we're also really known for cellaring and library selections that we have available. And we were one of the first wineries in Napa to actually form a library, because we knew that customers and restaurateurs wanted these aged wines. They just didn't have the capital to do it. So that's always been part of our DNA and who we are as a brand. And I think that 2018 gave us the perfect balance of both. I've always been searching for that in winemaking. I know some people like to car age their wine on the way home. I don't even wait till we release it before I start drinking, because all of us winemakers are so used to tasting young wines. We're like, 5 years, that's old. Didn't it just come out of the fermenter? That's what I'm tasting most of the time. So we'll bottle it, I'll drink it 6 months later, because that's what we're so used to. But those wines were drinkable. I mean, I loved standing at the press, calling the press fractions. I'm like, these wines are just, they're delicious coming out of the press. They were delicious after ML. They were delicious when we put them in a bottle. And if any of us drank them 3-6 months later, they were also delicious. But to Rebecca's point, that acidity and that freshness and those lower bricks, those were all things we had the luxury of receiving for our life that year. And that is going to help them age remarkably, unlike many of the much hotter vintages we've had recently.
Yeah. Ashley, what do you think? Because that's really interesting. So lower alcohol in 18s, fresher acidity. Like in the future, even in hot years, will you be thinking in those terms of trying to maybe dial it back a little bit and look towards much more harmonic wines? I know some years it's much more difficult, but what do you think as a winemaker? Will that be in the back of your mind?
I think it's so vintage dependent, and I would love every year to be like a 2018 where we have this, great growing season where we do capture acidity and a little bit lower bricks, but we have that phenological ripeness that we all love and we can taste, and we have that texture and freshness, and it all comes together. But I think that's what we do best, is we try to capture that at different time points in each vintage so that we're creating a wine that really represents the vintage. So I don't want to manipulate the wine to necessarily always be super consistent, although it's consistent in the fact that the wines are estate. But I think that really you wanted to have a vintage that tells a tale, and I think that's super important. But for sure, in a year like 18, you kind of knock it out of the park with this, you kind of have it all, where you didn't have to really, pick because it was a heat wave the next, 3 days, or, it was a little bit nicer to us. But I don't think I would change my winemaking style in a sense, but certainly I think there are vineyards that, I could pull from earlier as long as I get what I want to. And we certainly do that. Where I'm not letting something hang for a super long time
Sure.
to get bricks, but I'm really looking for flavor at the end of the day.
Because that's what and actually Dan can talk about that, but I was going to come to that. But actually 18 is interesting for me. It's what people didn't do. They didn't leave it out there for a long time and then go for heavy, like a huge cold macerations before the alcoholic fermentation. They didn't go for 200% new wood. They didn't go for long macerations. You know what I mean? All these things that were very common 10 years ago, it was just like, hold on, we have this beautiful harvest. Let's just like make the wine, let the wines almost make themselves. Maybe a little bit of makeup here and there, but not really. They're very transparent wines. Dan, what do you think? Come in, Dan.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, James. And I think we have to take the conversation back a little bit further when you talk about, did we learn anything in 18, and to kind of get us, to thinking about Napa Valley wines in a different way. Take it back to 2011, right? When we all struggled with a vintage that was incredibly cold, that there was some rain in October during, kind of the onset of like the harvest season for a lot of folks in Napa Valley. And I think everyone on this panel will tell you that their 2011 wines are probably the best wines they've ever made when they taste them today, 10 years later. And I think that we then, and then so I think the learning came from there. It's like the confidence came from 2011, 10 years ago, to give us this kind of, as we think about making wine, do we have to express what California does best, which is this amazing amount of perfectly ripened fruit due to this abundance of sunshine. And we can put that in the glass every single year if we wanted to. But as any winemaker will tell you on this panel, or in life in general, it's like the vineyard comes first, the vintage comes second, and the winemaker's hand comes third. And I think we have to realize that, you have to own your site. You have to, kind of represent the vintage well. And I think in 2018, we were given that luxury. It's not that way every year. 17 was not that way. 20 was not that way. But the learning, I think, started a while ago, and I think we're going to see a change. It's not a quick, rapid change, but I think we're going to see a sea change over time. And it's going to, you know, in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see a lot of wines. I mean, I was afraid in 11 to label Larkmead 13.7 alcohol. I rounded it up to 14 on the label because I was worried my customers wouldn't like that. And then in this wine in 2018, it's 13.7 alcohol, and I'm like, I put it on the fucking label. Like, let's do it.
Yeah.
Like if someone's gonna look at it that way, in that kind of microscopic lens to quality and drinkability and enjoyability and being a collector of wine, I don't want that person to be my customer. I want the person to enjoy and appreciate what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I think 2018 gave every one of us the opportunity to put our best foot forward, and I hope that continues.
It's really interesting what you say about 11, because it was actually 11 that brought me back to wanting to spend time in Napa and taste the wines. And it was funny, I think I was the only critic at the time that really gave high scores to a lot of 11s. And I'm happy to say, you say they're drinking wonderfully. I haven't had them in a while, so I'll look forward to trying them when I get back to Napa in September. But I agree that I've seen it, because I really started in 11 rating Napa again. And I've seen it even in hotter years, like look at 17, when it was so hot, or 15, huge heights, heat spikes. And I was just thinking the wines were going to be jammy, like in the 2000 to 2010, and they weren't. You know, people really were cognizant of making balanced wine, even under the circumstances, but still, you know, fruit forward, but with structure and freshness. So I agree with you that I really see that. And, you know, I taste a lot of wines, as you know, and that's exciting. And 18, in a way, is the culmination of that all coming together, and then Mother Nature and everyone working together. It's really like, and it's crazy. You guys all talk about how you love 2018, which is fantastic. And it really is this crazy vinous love story in Napa Valley. So it's awesome. Let's taste some wines. It's almost it's 10:35 and I haven't had any wine yet. That's really not a good thing for me. So Kristy, let's talk a little bit about your wine.
Absolutely. Well, welcome back to Napa time, where we've probably all had a glass of wine. And
You're looking happy.
Enjoying this, yeah. So as everyone was talking about, the threat of no rain was of particular importance to me, because while we all know that rain just dusts the Cabernet grapes off, it does not do the same for Chardonnay. It's not as forgiving. And so that's always a concern we have. I love to get that hang time in Chardonnay, like Cab. And so normally we'll start picking this mid to late September from some of our warmer sites. And then as we move up valley to the top of Howe Mountain, where we also have a Chardonnay, that'll go into early to mid-October. Well, sometimes those picking decisions are based on, is it going to rain in the next few days? And so we pick it because it's ripe enough, and it makes great Chardonnay. It's got good ripe textures and flavors, but maybe I'm looking for a little bit more diversity in my pick times. And so in 18, with that threat gone, the world was our oyster in terms of making Chardonnay. Yeah. I actually thought, you know, we can have that cool balance that I don't know what people think of Napa Chardonnay anymore. We've gone through a number of iterations. But what I wanted to shoot was, I call it jazz music, right in the middle. So you get some of those beautiful high notes, those low notes, and all the cool stuff that fills in the middle. And to me, that middle comes from that hang time. So the high notes are our vineyard sites, the clones, the elevation. The low notes are more winemaking techniques, barrels, lees, yeast stuff. And those middle ones come from the vintage. And so this was so perfect in terms of we got our Carnero site ripe with no rain, which is a miracle and something we love in Chardonnay. And then we get a little from just on the edge of Coombsville, mostly Napa Valley, that brings all of those cool classic ripe apple characters. And then our Howe Mountain vineyard brings the cool tropical element, because it's a completely different climate from Carneros. I mean, they are worlds apart while being in Napa. And so you build all of those things in through this vintage. We didn't have high bricks. You know, we got a 13.5 to 14 on every single lot because we brought them in exactly where we wanted. We had tons of natural acidity, but we could build layers of complexity that we hadn't been able to do in those hot vintages where we were picking because it was hot, and Chardonnay does not love the heat like Cabernet does. So we have to get it off the vine. But all of that really came together for us in 18. So I hope you guys tasting in person enjoy this.
No, I see that, and I like the. It's very transparent wine, and you get a really nice intensity at the finish, but it's all very in harmony and balance. So nicely done. Let's move on to Helen, and great comments too. I like that jazz. I'm a big jazz fan, so I'm with you there. So let's get on to the Kerr Cellars cab from Wapo Vineyard. Helen, tell us a little bit about how you describe that wine and what you were doing there.
Sure. So this vineyard is it used to be with Robert Mondavi Winery, and Constellation, when they acquired Robert Mondavi, they acquired this vineyard. So I think it's really a diamond in the rough, and I think it's kind of the story of a lot of Napa, where I think we're still kind of figuring out our terroir and learning that there are so many incredible sites and microclimates, and there's so much diversity. And getting more into single vineyard. Well, sorry, Kristy, I think blends are amazing too, but it's really fun to see the single vineyards and to see the differences between the wines. So this particular site is it's just at the border of Stag's Leap and Yountville. So it's just over that mound of Hartwell, and sits right there. And there's another knoll within the vineyard, and there are two blocks that comprise this blend. The first block is it's really red rocky volcanic soils that are up on the knoll, and the second block is kind of down at the base of the hill of Hartwell. And so it's a sloughed off soil, which sloughed off soils are like winemaker dreams. They're really nice because you get this blend of kind of alluvial and drainability, but rocks, and there's just the right amount of struggle that doesn't make really tannic bony wines, but they're really intense and complex wines. So the both blocks though really benefited in 2018 because there was a lot of just the right amount of canopies, so beautiful dappled light. Even though this is Stag's Leap, Napa Valley is really interesting the way the air moves, and so this is an eddy, and so it gets really warm and it picks really early normally. And so in 2018, with the canopy and beautiful dappled light and just the right amount of fruit and the really long hang time, which is so funny because I feel like hang time acquired such a bad name in the really hot decade of big alcoholic overripe wines. So it's weird to talk about it. And I'm happy to see that it's getting maybe the right application and that it can be a good thing, but it's not always a good thing. Yeah.
That's
Anyway, so this wine I like it a lot because that upper block with the volcanic soils, there's a lot of minerality. And I know we always think of minerality in whites, but I love minerality in reds.
Yeah.
And this has minerality. It has this kind of a baked brick or terracotta or iron character that's really nervy and really fun. And then on top of that, you have beautiful dried aromatic herbs and red fruit, and there are just a lot of layers. And then that lower block with the sloughed soil at the base of Hartwell has a lot of plushness and prettiness and floral notes. And so those two come together to kind of wrap this fleshy wine around more of a nervy spine. So it's really fun. It's a great, I think it's a really fun site.
I get that, and I remember why I really like this is it has almost like a graphite stone iodine thing going for it. It reminds me of like La Mission Aubryon or something, right in the middle of Bordeaux, and then you have the exuberant, beautiful Napa fruit. It's a really exciting wine, and I want to go see that. So that must be near Realm as well, then, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right, so let's move on to Dan. So Dan, tell me about the Dr. Olmo.
Yeah, thank you.
Not the man, the wine.
Moving all the way up to the top of the valley in Calistoga. We in 2018, Dr. Olmo. This is 100% Cabernet. It's 100% gravel soils on our property. I think Helen used all the words like bony and nervy and that I would use to describe this wine as well. But no, I really am pretty enthusiastic and excited about this particular wine in the vintage. It's kind of like as it rushes down towards the Napa River off the Mayakama Range. It's all this gravelly soils. It's a single parcel that we were able to kind of harvest on the earlier side and to burn out. And even though it was a cooler vintage, we still were able to burn out a lot of the green notes, and take those kind of bright green pyrazines that we always kind of try to avoid, and kind of darken them into these dried herb characters. But it's always a red fruited wine on gravel soils at Larkmead. One thing that Helen said way back in the beginning of this conversation was about the health of the grape must during the fermentation process. Larkmead has been organically farming for 5 years up to this point, and this wine borders on the verge of being a natural wine from an organic vineyard with kind of spontaneous fermentation, with no additives, no waters, no acids, nothing, just sulfur. And that to me is like the essence of a great vintage, where your vineyard is healthy and balanced, so that it actually, as it moves from the grape to the glass, there's not a lot of stress, coming from peaks and valleys of a rough vintage. And that really truly became, this gave this wine in 2018 the essence of what I believe Larkmead is, which is red fruited, a little bit of dried herb, lifted aromatics, and beautiful open palate. And at the same time, we had vintage characteristics, which is a cool year. So you get a little bit of those cooler, bluer fruits in the wine, but really wonderful, integrated tannins and texture.
But it still has that Calistoga, let's say, chewiness, like firmer and richer tannins. But at the same time, there's this freshness, and the end of the palate, it really, it's really clean. It makes you want to drink more. Like hold on, I don't understand that wine. I want to drink more. That's the excuse. But in fact, it's really excellent. So thanks, Dan. Ashley, tell me about the insignia. As I said, I think that's going to open some eyes for insignia drinkers.
Thank you. Okay, so the 2018 insignia, as it's been for many, many years, we've been sourcing from 6 of our estate vineyards, and they are really all over the valley. We have our vineyard in St. Helena, which is our northernmost vineyard, all the way down to our vineyard in Soskell, which is across the street, sort of from the Napa Valley College, and it's cooler. And we have a ton of color from that vineyard. And then in between there, we have our vineyards in Stags Leap District, Rutherford, and in St. Helena. And in Yountville and Oak Knoll. And so this is a true blend, unlike, the other, Helen and Dan and Kristy's obviously was a blend as well. So I love the idea of blending, because we always think of insignia as the very best blocks and lots from each vintage every year. And so we create a blend, and that might mean that it's 10% Malbec or 10% Petit Verdot, but it always sort of works itself out in the way that we have the vineyards planted. So in 2018 in particular, the wine is 87% Cabernet with about 8% Petit Verdot, and then a little bit of Malbec and Cabernet Franc. And the Malbec and Cabernet Franc are coming from our South Napa vineyard. And again, we get great hang time down there in any year, but also in 2018 for in particular. And we always get amazing color. Our Stags Leap vineyards, I always call them the ballerina vineyards. They're firm, they're strong, but they're super elegant. We get this like great floral characteristics. They're sort of up against the Vodka range. We get this.
Stags Leap really excelled in 18. We even did a story on it about a month ago. And I could see that in so many wines from Stags Leap. It was a very special year for Stags Leap.
Definitely, and the wine is really over 40% of our Stags Leap fruit. And our Rutherford fruit is definitely more of a backbone structure. It's a little bit more masculine, beautiful wine, more blackberry, black fruit characteristics. And our vineyard in Oak Knoll District, we call it Yountville Vineyard because it's sort of on the cusp. It offers a little bit more sort of chocolate and supple characteristics. It's a vineyard that we've had really, honestly, second vineyard that Joe ever purchased in 1979. So all of the vineyards really compose the blend, and it's the uniqueness of blending them together, I think, that creates insignia and why it's so special.
And the blend, was it an easy blend to do? Like it must, or hard in a way, because you could do the kitchen sink blend, just put everything in there.
It was definitely, I mean, blending insignia is definitely a task. And I would say in 2018, there are years it is much easier. And 2018 was much easier than say, you know, 2016 or even, you know, 2019 actually. So it's a wine that we age in 100% new oak for 24 months. And, you know, I think 2018 also allowed us, maybe in vineyards that we don't normally do extended maceration, but it allowed that. We had this great color, we had great tannin, and we weren't getting super tannic wines. So we were able to get that supple and texture that we like from extended macerations. So vineyards that I might not normally do that in, I did that in 2018. And I mean, I love there's great core fruit in this wine. There's like an Earl Grey key characteristic. I think the tannins are very supple. It's a wine that lingers on the palate.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Let's move on to Rebecca. But I really like the how fine the tannins are in that insignia. It really is something else. So fantastic wine. Hi, Rebecca. Let's taste your wine.
Sure. So 2018 Quintessa. You know, Quintessa is an estate. So this is an estate single vineyard wine, but it's a very diverse estate, and with different hillsides, different geologies, different terroir units. What was like just so amazing and special about 2018, and it shows in the wine, is the way that a year like this, with that kind of harmony, that kind of energy and balance, allowed every single part of the estate to shine through. So for me, 2018 Quintessa is just, it's incredibly transparent to terroir, to use your words, James, but really about purity and refinement. You know, Quintessa is an organic estate since its founding. We farm biodynamically. I don't add yeast. I don't add bacteria. I don't add anything other than sulfur every year. And usually the fermentations go just fine. Sometimes there's a couple of more struggling lots. In 2018, there was none of that. And just that complete connection between the vineyard and the winery, and now the wine in the bottle shows.
What I really like about the wine too is how it just goes like that. The tannins just build on the palate, you know, and they're so fine and gives it so much energy. And I find really interesting too, I like to tell European winemakers how all of you and so many others in Napa now define their wines by tannins, not by fruit. Everyone, oh, the tannins were that, my tannins that, like 10 years ago, no, I got the most fruity wine going, you know? And I think that is really, yeah, everyone's really talking about texture, and that's really, and that also is proof. I guarantee these wines will age beautifully because of that.
Oh yeah.
You know, that's history. We can't change the way great wines are. They age with tannins that are there and defined, as well as other components in wines. So well done. Let's talk to Jay real quick. Did you just want to say one other thing, Rebecca?
Oh no, I mean, I think that you hit the nail. For all of us, Napa Valley, we have the volcanic origins to our valley. We have the river influence. So it makes sense for us to talk about our tannins and our terroir, and we have that abundant sunshine. So we get the fruit, but what really defines us and defines each individual vineyard, what all of us are talking about as we're dialing in and understanding our properties, is that connection to the geology, to the terroir.
Yeah. And you see it. Sometimes I think that Burgundy is more the model for Napa than Bordeaux, because we have such incredible different terroirs. And if you make single vineyard wines, you know, you really see it, particularly if you're working with Cabernet, it's really amazing. And of course, then you can beat Bordeaux too and make amazing blends. So we win. Jay, let's hear let's see what you have to say about your 100-point wine. Like, it's really amazing. And
First of all, I'm just a little surprised to see James ever going to like Lotus over other vineyards. So it's a huge surprise. But also at the same time, I think that the vineyard, Lotus Vineyard, is one of the three single vineyard we are making. And I personally believe Napa is a special place. You can do both, as just James said. You can do Bordeaux blend, but at the same time, you can do Burgundy like site-specific single vineyard wine without having Meritage blend. Almost 100% cap, have such a nuanced and layered and also in-depth wine without blending too. So Napa Valley single vineyard wine is more towards Burgundian model, and Lotus is one of them. And Lotus is one of the most extreme vineyard. So that's located about the 1,200 feet elevation, facing direct west, and slope is almost 40-degree. So we would never gonna have a permit from the county if we plant it nowadays. So we're very lucky to have that crazy extreme vineyard. And also soil type is not just volcanic, and it's also very rocky. And it's almost like the soil is sitting on top of the rock. So if you walk on that soil, you hurt your feet sometimes if you don't properly wear some good boots. So all those crazy tannin-driven structure, monstrous tannin, our job, our goal is trying to tame that beast without losing the pure fruit. So we, that vineyard is planted in 1998. So 2018 has a lot of meaning. So that's about 20 years old vines. And also ever since we purchased in 2006, we changed everything from 2018. We watched for 2 years. And then we, of course, organically farming, and we started semi-biodynamic, and also we dry farming up there too. So all those effort we've been doing for 10 years, I think showing up. So I think that Lotus type of wine might be the least favorite James style wine, but after 10 years effort, I think we can convince someone like James is Lotus, that extreme wine could be pure and also layered and also a little refined. Still,
well,
yes,
that's why I like it in 18, because it's sort of extreme in the sense, extreme finesse with some fantastic depth of fruit and that little Napa touch of, the ripe fruit character. So it's extreme in that sense, but I don't a Beauty and the Beast, no, but in any case, I really like its depth, and I just think it's a fantastic wine. Thanks, Jay. Let me actually, we have time for a few questions, but I'd like to actually get one from our team here, since we are here in Hong Kong, halfway around the world, and everyone came this morning. Anyone have a question? Come on, someone has to have a question. Show Hong Kong. Natalie? Okay. Good question. So Natalie asked, how do you think the perception of Napa has changed in the marketplace as you make more refined wines? And in particular, 2018 being this this moment where it really comes through so clearly. Would anyone, how about, okay, Jay wants to answer this one.
Yeah, because I'm also share the same hat as a lot of the trade people in Hong Kong, because our family originated from Korea, bringing a lot of great wine from all over the world to Korea for more than 4 decades. That's how we end up having the winery here. And I don't think the Napa is naturally born to make a extremely extracted big wine, because if you try the 50s, 60s, 70s wines, Napa wine, and if you compare them to some of the best Bordeaux wine from 80 to 86, I see there's more edgeability and pure fruit, very layered, beautiful, balanced wine. But only thing that if you do the decade tasting from 80s and 90s and early 21st century, like 2000 to 2005, it's just a trend. People almost compete to make who's making even bigger extracted jammy wines to get a higher score. And also market liked it back then. So that's kind of a vicious circle going on in Napa. But nowadays we have such a talented, young, very good winemakers, and they understand more about the vineyard, and they start everything from the vineyard and making organic farming, biodynamic farming, and try to make more balance. Because we cannot make the Bordeaux style wine, because I don't want to make a Bordeaux style wine, then I'll let you guys buy the Bordeaux wine. We have to make a Napa style wine, but we can make a Napa style wine with the purity of fruit, but a lot more balanced and amazing refined wine. And you'll see more and more. And a lot of talented winemakers fight over global warming nowadays, but still, Napa has a great terroir, maybe even better terroir than any cap growing region in the world. So,
Nicely said, Jay. Let me bring in just a question from online question. I thought it was interesting. What would you compare? Is there a prior vintage you would compare 2018 to? I know Dan drinks a lot of also drinks old wines, like wines before he was even born. I don't know if it was that old, but anyways, that was a joke. Dan, like, tell me what you think prior vintage. What does 18 remind you of?
Thanks, James. No, just from just going back to your original question, your previous question that Jay answered so eloquently. I do think that like the 16 vintage in Napa, which was an abundant vintage that was slightly stylistically different than what we're accustomed to, because it wasn't the kind of drought conditions, low yielding. It was a little bit larger crop load and cooler vintage. I think 16 and 18 are really perfectly poised to kind of get the consumer of Napa Valley to think about, the nuances that are available here to us as winemakers and wine growers. But I 06 was my first vintage in Napa Valley, and I found that to be I said earlier in my conversation that September was the key month for 18. It wasn't the heat spikes in September. Same thing happened in 2006, and the yield. The vines were a little bit more vigorous and the yield was a little bit heavier, and we've had a very similar crop load in 2018 and vigor to kind of like manage the health of the vine and the health of the fruit and the energy of the fruit, which was a little bit more like a brighter, fresher style. There was a little more thicker skins in 2006 than there were in 2018, but I think we managed that vintage well. So I like 6 and 18, and I was someone who was on this call texted earlier drinking a 2006 Donna Estate, and I was like, you bastard, what a great wine that was, and a great vintage. So but yeah, I would say 2006. It's one of my favorites, even though it was also my first here in Napa.
How about Ashley? Any vintage that comes to mind for you?
I'm going to take this a totally different direction. I think of a vintage like 18 is a little bit like 12 for me. Two vintages that happened after two really hard vintages, and they were sort of a breath of fresh air of plentiful, awesome fruit characteristics, great hang time. So I'm going to coin it to be a little bit like 12, and with sort of the intent that we had a great harvest, and it also was plentiful, and we had sort of similar non roller coastery weather type in 2012 as well.